The stuff that has been happening with Blush Crunch has been quite a roller coaster. I wanted to wait until the situation is more clear before making a call, and I have noticeably stepped away from Dandy's world since the start of it. I said I wasn't gonna do a video on the situation, since I didn't want to seem like I was content farming it, but now I feel like it's an appropriate time for me to share my stance in all of this, and tell you all what the future of the channel is gonna be like in terms of Dandy's world content. A lot of the prosecution has left, Joji has stepped away from the situation, and Void has deleted his Twitter. And now, in August, Qual made a second statement apologizing to who she might have hurt and also announcing that she's stepping down as visionary lead of Blush Crunch, which is pretty much all that the prosecution wanted. So, with this, it seems like the situation might slow down, if not stop entirely. Now, we kind of have room to breathe in a way. The situation seems to have calmed down a bit, and we have room to talk about it without the threat of possible targeted harassment, like what happened with the Russian community, like with Shelly Show, and on Reddit, like with eShell. So, what happened? Why did Joji and Void suddenly leave? Almost at the same time, too. Well, let me give you a quick rundown of the day it happened so we're all on the same page here. If you'd like more information on the rest of the situation beyond this final bit, I will link a timeline and other docs in the description so you can read them for yourself. But I'm still gonna work off of the assumption that you know the basic gist of what's been happening. Well, on that day, a mutual of mine and fellow DandyTuber posted a PSA to help give the community more information regarding Blush Crunch. You can see the PSA on screen right now and pause to read it if you want, or find it in my community tab, but I won't read it in full to save time. The gist of it is basically sharing how the employees are treated, how well they're paid, and how the company is a lot more than just Qualver herself. It was a really good thread that ended up being endorsed by Aaron, a Blushcrunch employee, so you know it's trustworthy. And then, right after the PSA was officially endorsed by someone at Blushcrunch, a ton of those affected stepped away, and frankly, the timing is definitely something, but I'll get to it. So, how am I feeling about the situation? Joji itself said in its doc that they want people to come to their own conclusions, and I've been following the situation as closely as I can until now, reading all the docs that are released and paying attention to what's happening on Twitter with it. So I ask you to bear with me while I go through my reasonings for my personal conclusion. In situations like these, the people who accuse the defendant tend to be immediately seen as well intentioned due to the lack of immediate defense on the opposition. However, as time has passed, I think there's a lot more nuance to this situation than most people are frankly willing to acknowledge. While I am always open to both sides, the aggressor's side isn't making it easy to believe them. During this whole situation, it was a repeated thing that those affected were acting incredibly poorly and irresponsibly, and that just tainted the whole situation to me. And Blushcrunch's side isn't as evil and malicious as people are pinning it out to be either. Joji wasn't egregious, but it was definitely suspicious throughout the situation. It claimed in its doc that it wanted people to draw their own conclusions, but at the same time, the doc seemed to steer people towards one conclusion. And if you didn't share that conclusion on Twitter and were more skeptical, Joji would discredit you for not being informed. Not to mention how Joji would use the fact that it's disabled and has cancer as a trump card to shut discussions down. Whenever someone expressed doubts and didn't agree with it, they'd use it to frame that person as cruel for not siding with the disabled person with cancer. And while of course this behavior doesn't mean it lied, it's still an incredibly poor way to carry yourself as the face of a movement as big as this, and it shows a dissonance between what it says and what it actually seems to believe based on its actions. You're 25 years old, you should know better than to carry yourself like this. Using evidence from Rox, the known liar, pedophile, groomer, manipulator, also rubbed me the wrong way. Rox is not a good person, and he's proved to be a huge liar, so why are we taking his word for things? Why are we citing him as a reliable source of information for the community full of gullible children? And then later on, Joji reposts some stuff from Rox, who is a known manipulator, by the way, and it just seems like such a bad judgment call. Like, why are we giving the pedophile a platform to stand on? Like, I get Chochi's tweet was about how disgusted it was that Rox apologized before Quell, but like, again, Rox is a known manipulator? For all we know, he just lied. He straight up did lie about sending over the Flavor Frenzy files to Quell. We literally have evidence of him being untrustworthy. Was the fact he's a known groomer not enough of a red flag? The censored message is supposedly the Flavor Frenzy files being sent all the way back in 2024. It's edited and everything, so if he already sent them in 2024, so why try to send them again in April? And honestly, faking an apology is easier than a lot of people want to have you believe, by the way. It's generally so easy to fake apologies if you're good of your words. Even if you're disgusted and expressing anger, it's still not correct to repost his stuff, actively putting more eyes on him. That's how manipulators get back in the spotlight. Thanks to this whole situation, a ton of people seem like they're treating Rox better than they treat Quell, which is insane, because in the grand scheme of things, even if Quell did do bad things and hurt people, Rox is a groomer. I think there's a very clear worse person here. The fact that Rox is allowed to be cited for the accusers and make statements that people see without getting stomped repeatedly until he's a red smear on the floor is incredibly concerning already. You guys are letting him back in. Give him an inch and he'll take a mile. Do not give him more attention. For the love of God, you are sabotaging yourself. Joji's doc was framed incredibly strangely to me. It was raising red flags left and right when I first read it. I offhandedly mentioned it, but I'll go through some stuff that stuck out to me. Throughout the doc, Joji makes a lot of assumptions about Quell's motivations and frames them as factual information, when in truth, it really isn't. We can't know for sure what Quell was thinking, so filling in the blanks with what is effectively evil Quell fanfiction doesn't help at all. Joji used the lack of evidence and tried to paint it as proof of it telling the truth, since a lot of the stuff in the doc is said to have taken place in voice calls. Joji claims this is by design and tries to frame Quell for doing it on purpose to not leave a paper trail, which literally has no evidence to back it up. In this paragraph here, Joji claims it's not a dig at either of them, Quell and Rox, but then later in that same sentence says that the behavior of putting everything in voice calls is by design, therefore accusing them of purposely hiding evidence. Which is it, Joji? I thought you meant it wasn't a dig at them, so why are you digging? Joji claims to have nothing to gain from lying as a way to validate its own word, but throughout the doc, it shows repeatedly how it has a sort of vendetta against Quell. I can see very clearly how you could have something to gain from trying to tear Quell to shreds, so this is a very obvious lie. Joi and Void were also the two people involved that received cease and desists, and weirdly enough, both of them just refused to share the contents of said C&Ds. Joi has come out and said that it's because of sensitive information and them being cautious about that.
The cease and desist, I do not feel comfortable posting, and I explained, but several large reasons for it is that, as I said earlier, I had groups trying to dox or threaten my life. I don't feel comfortable posting information that could be traced to my living address. That CND has a lot of information that could reveal exactly where I am as it was delivered to me. It also has lots of sensitive information, and since BlushCrunch is trying to find ways to legally pin me, they may take it as a breach of NDA, because it can technically fall under that if I reveal exact paperwork.
But then just censor it, you know? The way they're so secretive about the contents of this very important document is something that throws me off. Especially when they use said cease and desist as undeniable proof that Quell's trying to silence the victims. Okay, so why didn't Gary or Chip or Snail also get one? Why only you two? If I'm being frank, without knowing the contents of the C&D, this can go both ways. Like, yes, it could be Quell trying to use her influence and money to try and silence people, but it could also just be a legal team taking action against people who broke an NDA. Without the actual words in the C&D to see why Joi and Void received them, we can't make assumptions one way or the other. The C&D is a neutral fact of the situation, and if someone tells you it isn't, they're trying to sell you something. I wish the best for Joi. I do believe it was genuinely hurt by Quell's actions in some way, but its handling of the situation was pretty poor. The lack of evidence never being addressed, the way they dismissed criticisms was also incredibly immature, and the association with other people also tainted it in my eyes. I'll circle back to other stuff about it, but for now, I'll move over to talk about Void. Void, age 29, knew Quell, age 22, for 6 years. back in 2020 when she was 15 to 16 and he was 23 to 24. But conveniently, in his doc, he only specifies to have been friends with her for 4 plus years, which is conveniently the time frame where Quell would have turned 18. Maybe because saying he knew her as a friend for 6 years makes him look bad? Make of this information what you will. Just throwing it out there. Void has always rubbed me the wrong way since the very start of this campaign. At the start, the Overwatch post really put me off. Void here posts about Quell playing Overwatch and tries to paint it as Quell not caring about the situation, which is honestly ridiculous. Quell playing a game does not say anything. Like, what is she supposed to do? Deal with the situation 24/7? Even her lawyers need to go home, man. And realistically, no one is spending every hour of their waking moments dealing with important stuff. Quell logging on to play a game does not prove she isn't dealing with the situation. It also doesn't prove she is either. It's just a neutral fact. She logged on to play Overwatch at some point around 3:30 p.m. for Void, and around 4:10 Void noticed she rightfully removed him for stirring the pot in a situation that is already a mess. Almost everyone plays video games, especially when they're upset. Quell playing a game to unwind during a stressful situation is not a sign of anything, and Void posting that with a caption that actively implies this means she doesn't care was actively harmful to what was going on and caused more harassment to be spread around, not just towards Quell, but among the community at large. And frankly, it's so weird how he also tries to spin her removing him as a bad thing. Of course she removed you. I would too if I was in her shoes. You're just causing more problems when it isn't necessary at all, and it's also kinda creepy to keep tabs on her activity like that, in my opinion. Void trying to paint something that is genuinely just a neutral fact to get people to dogpile on Quell even more just comes off as disingenuous and an extremely rude thing to do. The whole spinning neutral facts in their favor is a pattern that keeps happening, and I can't help but take notice of and raise an eyebrow at it. Which kinda does bring us to the whole we don't condone harassment thing. Void and Joji claim to not want to encourage harassment, and yet Void does that Overwatch post to stir the pot and make people angry, and also retweets fan art that is aggressive towards Quell and actively imply harassment is okay on an indirect level. Like, sure, they're saying they're against harassment, but actions speak louder than words, and other things they're doing are actively normalizing harassment in people's eyes. There's other cases where they genuinely target specific users for drawing their own conclusions, which goes against their own words. This specific person got put on blast by Joji for having an opinion that just so happened to make Joji look bad. This person was basically the first person to question things publicly, and while I see how it could be hurtful to Joji to be doubted and accused of extortion, specifically going out of your way to include this person's full Reddit handle in your post just led to a ton of people going and harassing eShell for no good reason. The specific comment in the screenshot here was also taken down by moderators due to public pressure, which is just wrong, frankly. And of course, with the Russian community, which was a whole thing. Someone who had the display name Jolly made a document disproving claims by Joji and Void and going into depth about their tactics, much like me in this video, but their doc was much more in depth, since I'm going less over the claims in their testimonies and more just their general poor conduct. But I digress. Joji, and especially Void, immediately jumped on the offensive when Jolly's doc was released, accusing the doc of using AI, even though the only AI used was Grammarly for translation and grammar. And phrasing it to the general audience like, it uses AI, is just straight up a lie by omission to make Jolly look worse. While yes, it technically isn't a lie that it uses AI, because Grammarly has AI features built in. But just nebulously saying it uses AI without specifying it was freaking Grammarly makes it sound way worse than it actually is, like they used ChatGPT to write the whole thing for them or something. Jolly's talk wasn't perfect, but it has some decent points, and immediately trying to discount their validity before people could read it and make up their own minds kind of goes against Joji's own words once again. The document also mentions someone, a YouTuber named Shelly Show, who was cited as a source. Shelly Show is a Russian dandy tuber who seems to be a little girl due to her very young sounding voice.
И начнем, конечно же, с нового туна. Вчера нам представили Воксвелла. Еще перед обновлением показали вот такую анимацию.
Probably no older than like 14 if I were to make a guess, and she just so happened to have a link for a Robux purchasing website in her description. This looks bad on a surface level, but with extra research they could have found out that the Robux purchasing link is specifically there to help Russian fans be able to access Robux, because Russian Roblox fans cannot buy Robux directly from Roblox due to certain sanctions in Russia, which means they have to find workarounds, like third-party websites, so they can get Robux to buy cosmetics and support games they like. So, is that what Void found out and relayed to the public? Nope, Void jumped the gun and immediately accused them of being bad actors and Robux scammers, and needless to say, this caused a massive wave of harassment to go towards all the Russian fans that were involved, including Jolly and Shelly Show. And I need to remind you, Shelly Show is a little girl. Void did come out later and apologize for that mistake, but frankly, it's still not something that should have happened in the first place. Not only did he only apologize after experiencing a lot of public backlash, this also just emphasizes my point about how aggressive the prosecution is. They just stomp out any sort of opposition as soon as it's brought up, and try to wipe it away before people can read them and form their own opinion. But then by the end, the damage is already done. On a side note, how many of you actually read Jolly's document? How many of you just took Joji's and Void's word for it that it was untrustworthy without taking a look at it yourself? I'm just wondering. And that's not even mentioning the fact that during this whole debacle, Void just said some extremely xenophobic and out-of-pocket things towards Russian people for genuinely no reason. And yeah, Void did say xenophobic stuff, and people telling you he isn't are just lying and twisting the truth. Here's word for word what he said. I have screenshots. This. People say, oh, he's racist for saying free Ukraine, but no, that's not the point really. Of course almost everyone agrees that saying free Ukraine is a good thing, but the point is the assumption that just because they're Russian that they support Putin. It's like saying just because someone's American that they support Trump and ICE, as if there aren't millions of Americans speaking out against it and being affected by it. Or just because someone's North Korean that they support Kim Jong-un, like there aren't so many people who are trying to escape their country, and so many of them who are getting killed for it. It makes no sense, and it's genuinely a harmful way to frame things. It's basically implying all Russians are war criminals and personally at fault for what's happening in the world, when it's just a corrupt government they can't really do anything about. That's what people mean when they say Void is racist, and while technically the correct term is xenophobic since he was hating on them based on nationality, not skin color, it's still bad. Why would an anti-Russian government sentiment deter them anyway? Is it because you believe all Russians believe in Putin even though they probably don't? There are Russians that don't. A lot of them, actually. And what Voight said is just xenophobia. Straight up. On a release side of Jolly, the Russian user who made the doc entirely, they were supposedly impersonating someone else in the fandom and acting generally a little suspicious. But like, still, if Voight suddenly said this when he felt comfortable in openly disliking Russians, then who knows what else he believes in and just doesn't talk about. Like, forgive me for not wanting to trust someone whose first reaction to a Russian user being the villain in his eyes is to scream this from the rooftops, as if all Russians are somehow Putin bootlickers. Like, what? Come on, be so for real. Void also has a tendency to be extremely aggressive and insulting when anyone doesn't blindly trust their cause, and for someone who claims to want people to come to their own conclusions, he sure loves throwing insults at people who are respectfully sharing their perspective. As soon as people brought up good points, like Poco's PSA, Void immediately went on the offensive, calling them a LARPer for like genuinely no reason. That was just rude. Like, sure, he backed down once Aaron endorsed the PSA, but he still immediately jumped to childish insults without even listening to what the other side had to say. That is genuinely a lot of their strategy. They just want to silence anyone who has a different perspective. Anytime anyone expresses doubt, or skepticism, no matter how respectful they are in their phrasing, people just jump them immediately and aggressively and try everything to get people to just not listen. Which is just not how debates work. If you truly want people to come to their own conclusions, why are you trying to form a following that is so dedicated to shutting down any opposing views and respectful discussions? It's just disingenuous and incredibly suspicious behavior. And then, of course, Void deleted his Twitter account entirely shortly after Poco's PSA cleared things up, which is honestly even more suspicious. If Quell going to voice calls is by design to leave a lack of evidence, according to Joji, what is deleting the entirety of a Twitter account as soon as everything isn't going your way 100%? That just looks like textbook destruction of evidence. I'm sorry, it just does, and I'm struggling to come up with a good reason for him to delete the account entirely rather than just leaving Twitter that isn't just him trying to cover his track. If you want to step away from the situation, then just do. But leave your account up so people can look back at what you did. And this all culminates in the doxing situation. So far, I've shown why I am personally wary of Joji and Void, but this was the nail in the coffin for me. Joji and Void went to do a short interview of Navaudi, where Void very bluntly shared information on how to find Quell's real-life name and other personal info. Joji and Void have come out to say that this is not doxing, and I massively disagree. Saying it's not doxing because you didn't directly share the information is just grasping at straws. You still told a massive audience the exact place where they'd need to look to find Quell's personal information. That is doxing. Even if it's public information, it's still doxing because you literally directed people to it when people didn't know before. Bringing attention to that fact and letting people know about something that isn't actually that well known when you know your community is actively trying to harass Quell is just irresponsible. And you claim to be against harassment, but you're just making it easier for your audience to harass. It's like a YouTuber saying they're against harassment but then not censoring people's names and letting their followers find those people. Like, yeah, you can say with words that you don't condone harassment, but you, as a public figure, also have to take precautions to prevent harassment. Censoring people's names and actively preventing your community from having an easy time harassing is part of your responsibility. I would know. And Joji and Void's actions regarding Quell's personal information in this case just show a lack of respect and care. I don't want to claim that they're being malicious on purpose. It's impossible to know for sure. But it's still undeniable it was an incredibly irresponsible thing to share. And the way they're trying to avoid accountability for that by claiming it's not doxing, it's public information, just shows how they don't really care about how their actions affect other people and how they reflect on the situation they're the face of. It comes off as disingenuous to say you don't condone harassment, but then make it easy for your community to find that sort of information, letting them know about it and reposting fan art of the Toons beating up Quell with brass knuckles. And sure, Joji claimed they tried to convince Navaudi to not post that info, but then why even share it in the interview in the first place? Navaudi not sharing that info would just be bad journalism. They're not at all in the wrong for doing so and the information was freely given. So if you're going to do an interview with someone that wants to share all the facts, you shouldn't share stuff that you don't want to be shared. Not to mention, their interactions with Navaudi kinda showed that they were more concerned about being accused of doxing than potentially sending dozens of people directly to where to find Quell's personal information? Like, okay, what? And Navaudi didn't even insist on it like Joji claimed. It straight up shifted the blame onto Navaudi when it was Joji and Void saying it was okay. You're a public figure, and a public figure of a very young community that you know is volatile, and you should carry yourself with that level of gravitas, because if you don't, it causes situations exactly like this that just spiral out of control, and now the community is eating itself apart due to how it was enabled. And with the way they defend themselves like, oh, it's not technically doxing, it's public information, just comes off as trying to justify their own reckless behavior. Yeah, it's public information information, but specifically bringing the attention of thousands of people towards said information is still a reckless and cruel thing to do. And Joji has been doxxed before. They should at least have some compassion here, even if not towards Quell herself, towards the innocent employees that work for Blushcrunch and maybe on those documents too. Circling back to the age thing, Void was 23 when he met Quell, and Quell was 15. And while I'm not gonna say this confirms anything happened, it kind of paints a picture of Void as a person, doesn't it? Especially with Quell's statement in mind. But before I go any further, I must add, adults can have friendly and amicable relationships with children. It can even be healthy. But it's the difference between your mom being your friend and you being your mom's friend, if that makes sense. Having a close relationship with someone that is much younger than you is something you must take very carefully as an adult. You're much older and you hold a lot of power over that person implicitly. And most responsible adults are acutely aware of that, and they treat the children they are associated with the level of respect they deserve. It's okay to be there for them and support them, but it also needs to be acknowledged that your relationship cannot be equal from both sides. It can never be. My problem isn't with the age gap by itself, it's the age gap paired with other behaviors Void has exhibited. For example, every time he talks about Quell, he talks about her like they've always been on equal levels of maturity, and I feel like that comes off really weirdly when naturally he would have to be more mature and knowledgeable than Quell. And with the whole rock situation thing, they seem to try to paint Quell as being a masterful liar, but not really. Personally, I would go so far as to say Void was more responsible than her when it comes to lying to the community about rocks. He was a trusted adult in that group, 8 years older than Quell, and he also fell for Rox's manipulation, and that is somehow entirely Quell's fault? I mean, this man is pushing 30 and is sending a wave of harassment to a person who's almost 10 years younger than him, acting generally quite petty towards her and anyone else who doesn't blindly trust his word, and also acting really suspicious. And I just ask at the end, with this all in mind, with how Void acts, do you understand why I don't think Void is trustworthy? When Void talks about Quell, are you willing to believe him? Believe him over the mountains of inconsistencies, odd behavior, lies about rocks, colluding with Duck Adams, xenophobia, and the deletion of his socials as soon as he got in trouble? If you want to believe him, then sure, go ahead. But I personally won't. This man gives me the creeps. But still, their behavior doesn't necessarily prove that they're lying, like some other people like to claim. I still think there's probably merit to what they're saying to some extent, even if they're clearly incredibly biased. But it's still undeniable their poor behavior has been making the situation way worse than it had any business being in the first place. And this is not to glaze Quell, by the way. I have my own gripes with how she's been handling the situation too, like the lack of evidence in her response doc and the radio silence for so long. But it's just not fair to criticize Quell's doc for lacking evidence and not extend the same level of attention to the opposing side. Justice is about just that. Justice. And I will criticize both sides when I personally see things that are worth pointing out. It's just that Quell isn't really openly doing anything right now, so there's less to talk about. This video is just more about Joi and Void because they just do more. And circling back to something I mentioned offhandedly earlier, because I think this is the most damning thing here, the cease and desist. This is definitely the most suspicious part in all of this. On July 13th, Joi and Void both got a cease and desist letter from Blushcrunch. They claim it's an effort from Quell to silence the victims, and that the cease and desist is inherently exploitative and effectively proof of Quell throwing her money and influence around to scare them into submission. While that sounds like a convincing story on the surface, when you think about it, it's just like the dogs. More holes open up. Cease and desists are legal documents. They have to be understandable and state their intentions clearly. Yet Void and Joji claim that their documents were vague and unclear. They also contradict themselves by also claiming that the CND was about NDA breaches, which... Okay, which is it? Is it vague and unclear, or does it clearly state that it was an NDA breach? If it's an NDA breach, then it should be very obvious what he did, no? It should be right on the document. And that's not all. Joji and Void have come out on record to state they don't feel comfortable sharing the contents of this CND. Joji citing that it has personal information that could lead to it being vulnerable in the interview with Navali.
The cease and desist I do not feel comfortable posting, and I explained, but several large reasons for it is that, as I said earlier, I had groups trying to dox or threaten my life. I don't feel comfortable posting information that could be traced to my living address. That CND has a lot of information that could reveal exactly where I am as it was delivered to me. It also has lots of sensitive information, and since BlushCrunch is trying to find ways to legally pin me, they may take it as a breach of NDA, because it can technically fall under that if I reveal exact paperwork.
But then, why not censor personal information? If what Joji and Void are claiming is true about the CND being unfair and an abuse of power, they have a huge trump card to get doubters, like me, to back off and believe them. And yet, they don't consider sharing it at all, not even with censored personal information. And it's not even due to NDA or anything. An NDA wouldn't prevent them from sharing the contents of a CND publicly, and it wouldn't at all affect their legal case against Quell. And frankly, if it was truly a ploy to silence victims, it's also weird how it was only Void and Joji to receive them, the people under NDA. If the C&D was truly bullshit and full of lies, why not send it to everyone to silence everyone? Which kinda makes their arguments about it being false fall apart. They got the C&D because they did something that likely breached NDA and got in trouble for it. Blushcrunch is not wrong for enforcing their NDA. If they don't, then it sets the precedent that everyone can breach theirs, and that's not good for the company from a logistical perspective. But one thing is true. Cease and desists are legal documents, and this one was probably issued by Quell's lawyers. C&Ds have to very clearly state why it was sent for them to be effective, because if you don't properly warn whoever you're warning, then it can be argued that they didn't know what constituted as a breach, and that renders a C&D effectively useless. C&Ds are admissible in court. You can't just make a bullshit C&D or else it's gonna make you look really bad if the case ever reaches the eyes of a judge. So why would Quell's lawyers make such an irresponsible choice? Not to mention, sending fake cease and desists can also have huge consequences to the lawyers if they do it. They could be disbarred and be unable to practice law altogether in the future. Why would Quell's lawyers risk their entire careers and ability to even practice law for nothing? The pay cannot be that good. Joji and Void's hesitation to share it is just so suspicious. It would genuinely help them so much to share the contents with censored names and addresses if what they claim about the CND is true. A ton of people would probably see it as an obvious abuse of power and be persuaded to side with them. Yet they don't share it, which is definitely strange, to say the least. And honestly, people like to claim the CNDs are to silence the victims, but not really. The CNDs were only delivered to Joji and Void for breaching the NDA, most likely. Chip and Gary, who were direct victims of Rox, didn't receive anything, and neither did Sam and Snail, who are ex-friends of Quell that claimed she wronged them. Joji and Void's main complaints were discussing the workplace culture at Blushcrunch, and in discussing that, they likely breached the NDA in some way, which is why none of the others have received them, which they would have if the goal of the CND truly was to silence the victims. Claiming it's a ploy to silence the victims lumps Void and Joji with the other people who are actual victims of grooming, like Chip and Gary. It's at best a strange way to word things, and at worst an intentional way to make them more sympathetic by putting themselves in the same group as people who have suffered worse. You probably noticed that I haven't used the word victim to describe Joji nor Void in this entire video, unless I'm quoting them directly, and that's because I don't think it's right to conflate them. Calling them all nebulously victims just lumps them in with actual victims of grooming, when at worst they're just kinda treated poorly by Quell as a friend. It is not the same thing. Even if Joji and Void are being 100% truthful, which as you've seen throughout the video, I really doubt, they're still not victims on the same level of Chip, Gary, and all the others that Rox hurt. Simple as that. But my reasons don't just stop at Joi and Void. I also have a lot to say about how the community has been acting as well. Before I get into it, I will acknowledge a lot of these people are naive kids. And yes, I am counting 19-year-olds as kids here. You'll understand when you're older. But still, this behavior was kind of enabled by Joi and Void, whether intentionally or not. So how the community is acting isn't entirely independent of the situation. This kind of environment was specifically created to be this way so people wouldn't question things. That much is clear. But anyway, the community's behavior during this situation has been nothing short of disgusting, if I'm being blunt. It's not even just on Twitter, which is the home for toxicity. It's like everywhere. People make TikToks to shame others who choose to keep playing the game for not believing the allegations, and just straight up bully anyone who questions things, and also spread insane amounts of misinformation just to make people angrier at Quell and the devs, which just leads to more harassment being sent towards Blushcrunch employees who truly have no involvement. The misinformation epidemic going on right now is insane. So many people are truly just making shit up to make people angrier, which is so stupid. Like, why are you doing that? They say things like, oh, the updates have sped up after the situation. Clearly, Quell is just trying to win us back. Never mind the fact that almost weekly updates were already a thing before. When the Easter event ended and Quell made that announcement that the game was preparing to come out of alpha, we got so many updates back to back, with only at most 2 weeks between updates. First was Sprouttoon of the Week. 2 weeks later, Duo Machines. A week after that, Vmail. Then we got the Care Bear collab 2 weeks after, and Finn's Tune of the Week was a week following that. Then after that, updates stopped before the quality of life update due to this situation starting. Now, after the month break to let the situation breathe, we got the quality of life update. Then a week later, it was Tisha's Tune of the Week. And then we got Waxwell 2 weeks after Tisha. The pace is exactly the same as before, it's just that we had a month to breathe because of the situation, and Blushcrunch likely needed time to let the lawyers do their investigations. And it'd be best to hold off until Quell could make a clear statement that didn't mess up their legal case, because if they just kept updating before Quell made a statement, it'd just make things worse, so they held on to updates for a month. We probably would have gotten Waxwell last month if the situation didn't force them to pause updates. This is just a continuation of the update streak we had since the end of Easter. Then there's the accusations that Waxwell was made in reaction to the drama, purely because a new tune would drive a lot of people back to the game, and that's just untrue. If you believe this, you just don't know anything about game design, frankly. Aaron himself confirmed Waxwell had been in the works for up to 5 months before his release. Like, sure, a fan can come up with a design concept and draw it in an evening, but making a tune doesn't stop at drawing them. They have to write their lore in full, iterate on the design to make it perfect, decide what their relationships with everyone else are, write dialogue based on that, iterate on stats and ability ideas, program said ability into the game, playtest them to see how good they are, balance them if they're too weak or strong, bug fix any issues with them, 3D model the character, potentially adjust the model if it doesn't look like the concept art. If they have a lore video, that has to be animated. If they have to render the thumbnail images, they have to render the stuff in the game, they have to make the teaser, which can only be done after the 3D models are finished, they have to draw the ability icon, you get it. And I'm probably missing some steps. Then, and only then, can they be released to the public. Do you really think they could do all that in a month? While also working on other features at the same time? Get real. None of these updates are reactionary. We would have gotten them regardless. And what is Blushcrunch supposed to do? Not release anything for possibly half a year because that's how long the legal case could take? Potentially longer? The developers need to be paid, which means they need to work, which means updates need to be released. Are you implying they should all be out of a job just because of some accusations being leveraged towards their visionary lead? Not even the president, the visionary lead. Why should the innocent programmers, artists, modelers, and playtesters working on the game be out of a job just because one of their higher-ups is under fire? The game needs to release updates so those people can keep working. Another thing people like to throw around is the fact that Quell controls everything at Blush Crunch. And while it's true that she holds the rights to the game and founded the company, she's only the visionary lead now. Joe is the president, the person running the company. So pinning all the alleged mismanagement on Quell when she's not even managing anything besides the vision of the game is so weird. And circling back to the point about harassment in the community, anytime anyone expresses any sort of doubt on the situation, they get jumped, and genuinely straight up harassed by blind followers of Joi and Void. I can name several people who are just constantly on Twitter throwing insults and not actually engaging in respectful discussions. I won't, because I don't want to cause more harassment to be spread around, but the fact that I can is already insane. Of course, the harassment isn't exclusive to the prosecution side, as any situation is, but frankly, my interactions with the believers of Joji and Void have been considerably worse, even back when I was more open to the situation and just wanted to find out more. Most of my interactions with non believers have been quite amicable, actually. People are just discussing what they see, sharing info, and expressing their opinions based on the information given. While the other side feels like any time I want a discussion to start, they just go, "Trust the victims! You're bad for doubting them!" And it's tiring. It doesn't encourage a space for healthy discourse to just shut down any opposing views and harass them. This is the reason I haven't been very open about the situation. I know people are gonna call me out because I came off very Joji-sided in my Q&A, and I did. And frankly, it wasn't because I was fully on board. I was just afraid. Frankly, just straight up scared of expressing my personal opinion, because the community has shown how it's so willing to harass people relentlessly for not subscribing to their side, which is behavior that, as mentioned earlier, is also indirectly encouraged by Joji and Void. These actions from the community are actively harming the cause. Instead of informing and being open to sharing information, they just aggressively harass anyone who doesn't agree, and ultimately, that just harms everyone and doesn't help. If you truly care about this cause, then you should probably carry yourself with more respect and tact, because behaving in this way is only driving more people away from wanting to believe, like me. I've never gotten any positive interactions with that side when I expressed my doubts. Maybe if they respectfully explained things in a satisfactory way, I wouldn't be in the spot I am right now, but they haven't, so here I am. So, where is this all leading to? Well, I hope I made my point clear of this information. In my opinion, the situation is a lot more gray than a lot of people make it out to be. I'm not saying Quell is a saint either, don't get me wrong. I do have my bone to pick with her, but it's just that she's rightfully silent as her lawyers handle the situation, which is the responsible thing to do, considering said lawyers are professionals and she's not. But then that means I have considerably less bones to pick with her than with the people who were more active on Twitter and spoke almost every day about the situation, like Joji and Void. I do wish everyone the best. For all it's worth, I wouldn't wish bad on anyone, even if they're clearly not acting with the best motives. It's incredibly clear to me that we're missing something. It's not as simple as they're making it seem. We only have one perspective after all, and even if they're not maliciously twisting the truth, they could still be lying in the sense that they're misremembering details due to their emotional states at the time, which could be painting a worse picture than what is actually factual. It's really hard to disconnect yourself from your emotions to look at situations that affected you that badly. I can't even claim that I've done it effectively myself, but it's something you should do your best at when discussing stuff like this. A lot of stuff in the testimonies just straight up doesn't add up, and literally all of them have little to no evidence of what is actually being claimed. So, yeah, I don't believe it. The accusation that Quell lied doesn't hold any water at all. She was being manipulated by Rox, which is pretty much a proven fact, by the way. Her inaction after Rox showed her the drawings is because she believed him. Rox is a known manipulator, and we literally see him doing exactly that in the snippet we have of the call. And I don't know, it also feels weird to put all of that on Quell when Void was also in that call. Like, okay, you also didn't do anything, and even worked with Quell to defend Rox when the accusations first came forward back in the day. Why is it bad for Quell to have lied, quote unquote, but not hold Void to the same standard. To be honest, I think if we're being harsh on Quell for lying, we should also be even harsher on Void. He's much older than her, and was a trusted adult in that group, and should have known better, while Quell's much younger and clearly under Rox's thumb. Void also blindly believed Rox's lie that he wouldn't do it again, because that's how manipulation works. When you're lied to, your perception of reality is warped, and both Void and Quell were manipulated by Rox, and consequently also lied for him and kept him around for longer than they should have. It's up to you whether to be upset at that or forgive them, but you must hold both of them to the same standard because they were in the same situation and did the same things. Only dogpiling on Quell for lying, while completely glossing over Void's involvement in that exact situation is ridiculous. But anyway, the way everyone's jumping to conclusions of how Void and Joji are actively discouraging their community from looking at different perspectives outside of their own, refusing to show important pieces of evidence that would be concrete, like cease and desist, and also completely destroying evidence to not leave a paper trail like Void deleting his account is incredibly weird for someone who claims to want people to draw their own conclusions. I truly want to believe them if they're telling the truth, but I can't in good conscience blindly follow a cause that has so many red flags. So many false accusations ruin people's lives because people take it at face value. True justice is trying to see things for what they are, and Void and Joji are acting incredibly bad and suspicious in ways that I cannot side with from a moral standpoint. And Quell's statement announced that she's stepping down, which is exactly what a lot of them asked. Frankly, Quell's statement was great. It's up to you to believe it, but I personally think it was way more reasonable, well put together, and professional than anything the quote-unquote victims came up with. It feels so terrible to me how Quell was forced to step away from her own creation and project purely because of people's poor actions, harassment, and disgusting behavior online when it comes to her. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, but it seems like the accusers don't agree because it's directly their fault for encouraging this sort of environment. I hope I made my stance clear throughout this video. I don't think the testimonies are trustworthy. And even if they were true, I don't want to support people who act like this, encouraging harassment by putting people on blast, not being professional, platforming a pedophile and using his word as if he isn't a manipulator, not having enough evidence for most of her claims while expecting blind belief, colluding with Duck Adam, and being genuinely xenophobic towards the Russian community. This is all stuff that crosses a line for me, so I feel very confident in my decision to return to Dandy's World now. I think I'm done with the situation. It's all a bunch of nonsense that is actively wasting my time. If you made it this far in the video, thanks for hearing me out. Also, just so I know you watched the video, put a little bat emoji in your comment. Any comments that don't have a bat emoji somewhere in them will be taken as not having watched the full video. So if you want me to take you seriously, make sure to let me know that you paid attention by using a bat emoji. If you like my Dandy's World content, rejoice! I'm going to continue working on more videos. I think the game is genuinely going in a good direction right now, and I feel confident in my decision to stick with it. Jochi said it's okay for people to come to their own conclusions, and after reading everything, this is the conclusion I came to. If I missed anything, you can kindly correct me in the comments. So anyway, remember to not harass anyone, because that's cringe and will only cause more harm than good. And if you stuck around all the way to the end, thanks for listening to me yap about Dandy's World once again. Goodbye.